Hey YouTube, this is PrimetimePokemon. In this video, I'll be reviewing my Golisopod GX and Zoroark GX deck, also known as a Zoroark deck. Now this is the second deck that I've reviewed on my channel that features Golisopod GX. The first one that I reviewed included Garbodor. So this deck is very popular right now. It is a quick attacking type deck, and with Zoroark GX you can get the exact cards you want into your hand each and every turn. If you'd like to see the other deck review videos that I've done for the 2018 Standard Format, in the description of this video you'll find a link to the playlist I've created for these types of videos. So this video will be laid out the same as the other deck review videos that I've done on my channel. The beginning here, I'll lay out the general strategy with this deck. The middle part of this video will show the deck checklist on the screen, as well as including a deck checklist in the description of this video, and then a majority of this video, I'll be going through each and every card in this deck, stating why the card is in the deck, and then how that card is used. So as far as general strategy goes with this Golisopod GX and Zoroark GX deck, this is a two-hit knockout deck, meaning you're not going to knock out many Pokemon in one turn. Ideally, you're going to want to have two Zoroark GX set up on your bench to use its trade ability, thus allowing you to get the exact cards you want into your hand every single turn. And then Golisopod GX can do major damage for only one grass energy card when you move it from your bench to your active Pokemon spot. So this is a fairly quick attacking deck, and your main attacker is going to be Golisopod. I do use Mewtwo from the Evolutions set in this deck, mainly to counter Lucario GX and then Buzzwole GX. I use Tapu Koko, a Black Star promo, for its free retreat cost, and then I use several Tapu Lele GX so I can get to Guzma or any supporter I want in my deck, and then potentially modify my opponent's active Pokemon. On the screen now you can see the deck checklist for this deck. I use 19 Pokemon. I did have Mr. Mime from the Generation set in this deck for a while, but removed it. Mr. Mime from Generations would make it so that if it was on your bench, it would prevent all damage from attacks to your bench Pokemon, which is useful against something like Buzzwole GX or even Tapu Koko that I use in this deck, but I really didn't use it that often, so I took it out. And then again, I use several Zoroark GX and Golisopod GX. I do use the Zoroark from Breakthrough for its ability, allowing you to move it to the active Pokemon spot right away and do major damage, at least for one turn. I use 33 trainer cards in this deck. I do have 4 copies of Guzma, mainly to modify the Pokemon in my opponent's active Pokemon spot and to use Golisopod GX's move. And then I have several trainer cards that allow me to either modify the top cards on my deck or retrieve cards from my discard pile and put them either into my hand or my deck. I use 4 copies of Puzzle of Time and then 1 Super Rod. I also use 4 Field Blowers just because I don't want to face something like a Garbodor and have them turn off abilities, so I have 4 Field Blowers to prevent this. As far as energy cards go, I only use 8 total, 4 double colorless, 4 grass. And Golisopod GX only requires 1 grass energy card when attacking, and all the other Pokemon require double colorless energy. And then I do have both Puzzle of Time and then Super Rod, like I mentioned, to get those energy cards back if they are discarded. So I can get to showing each and every card in this deck now. 19 total Pokemon. I can start with the Wimpod Golisopod line first. So I do use a 3-3 line of Wimpod and Golisopod GX. Both are from the Burning Shadows set. I do like the HP on Wimpod of 70, so it is harder to knock out if it's on your bench. The card does have a high retreat cost. You may want to use something like a Heavy Ball to get to it. It does have a good ability called Wimp Out, that if you do have to put Wimpod in the active Pokemon spot to start the game, you can retreat it for free. You're never going to want to attack with this card just because it requires 2 energy and it only does 30 damage. Golisopod GX, which I mentioned is also from Burning Shadows, is the featured Pokemon in this deck. It has an excellent HP of 210. It is weak to Fire-type Pokemon and has a high retreat cost. All 3 moves on this card are useful. First Impression is the main move to use. For only one grass energy card, this move does 30 damage plus. If this Pokemon was on your bench and became your active Pokemon this turn, this attack does 90 more damage. So it does 120 damage for only one grass energy card. That's why I use 4 Guzma and then also use Tapu Koko with that free retreat cost to help and get Golisopod GX into the active Pokemon spot. You can have 2 Golisopod GX set up and then continuously switch between the two to do 120 damage each and every turn. Armor Press is this card's second move. For 2 energy cards, 1 grass and 1 double colorless, it does 100 damage. Plus, during your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon takes 20 less damage from attacks. So this move helps Golisopod GX have an even higher HP. It puts it up to about 230. And then Crossing Cut GX is the one move on this card that can knock out a Pokemon in one turn. Attach a choice band to this and you can knock out something like Tapu Lele GX in one turn. For 2 energy cards, it does 150 damage, plus you must switch this Pokemon with one of your bench Pokemon, so it helps reuse First Impression the very next turn. So Crossing Cut GX is a GX attack I use quite a bit when playing with this deck. So like I mentioned, Golisopod GX is the main attacker in this deck. Zoroark GX can also be used to attack. So next up here would be a 4-3-1 line of Zorua, Zoroark GX, and Zoroark. I used 4 copies of Zorua from the Shining Legends set. This has an HP of 60 and 2 moves on it. One move that does 10 damage, one move that does 20 damage. So I can do 20 damage for 1 energy card. It does have a low retreat cost, but for the most part I'm going to try and use Bridget, get a couple of Zorua on my bench, and then evolve both of Zorua into Zoroark GX. Zoroark GX, also from the Shining Legends set, 3 copies of this card. Like Golisopod GX, this card has a high HP, so it takes a lot to knock out. It is weak to fighting type Pokemon, so watch out for Lycanroc GX, Buzzwole GX, and Lucario GX. The main reason you want to use this card is for its ability Trade. It says once during your turn, you may discard a card from your hand. If you do, draw 2 cards. And this ability can be combined with Puzzle of Time or Mallow to get the exact cards you want on the top of your deck. And then Riotous Beating does 20 damage times the number of Pokemon in play for yourself. So it can do up to 120 damage for 1 double colorless energy. So Golisopod GX and Zoroark GX are very similar in the amount of damage it can do when attacking. And then its GX attack can't be used because I do not have any darkness energy in this deck. And then Zoroark, I use 1 copy of Zoroark. This is from the Breakthrough set. The main reason I use this is because of its ability called Stand-In. This card does have an HP of 100, which is a little bit higher for a Stage 1. Its ability says once during your turn, if this Pokemon is on your bench, you may switch this Pokemon with your active Pokemon. I do not use any Floatstone in this deck, so this is useful to retreat a Pokemon for free. And then if your opponent does have a full bench, you can move this card into the active Pokemon spot and potentially knock out a Pokemon GX in one move. Mind Jack, for the 1 double colorless energy, does 10 damage plus 30 more damage for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So this move could do up to 190 damage with a choice band and knock a lot of GX cards out in one turn. This card may be knocked out the next turn, but it's useful for switching Golisopod GX out of that active Pokemon spot, and it is a card that if knocked out only gets 1 prize card instead of 2. The next Pokemon here would be Mewtwo. This is from the Evolution set. Just 1 copy of this card in the deck. It does have a high HP of 130. Psychic is the main reason I want to use this card. For 2 colorless energy or 1 double colorless energy, it does 20 damage plus 20 more damage for each energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. Like I mentioned, Lucario GX and Buzzwole GX are weak to Psychic type Pokemon, so this card can potentially knock out either of those 2 Pokemon in one turn. You can keep it on your bench and Guzma it into the active Pokemon spot. And then if Buzzwole GX, for example, has 3 energy on it. It can do major damage to Buzzwole GX. Barrier is the second move on this card. You can't use this move just because I don't have any psychic energy in the deck. And then I use 1 copy of Tapu Koko, a solid HP of 110. This is a Black Star promo SM30. Flying Flip is the move on this card to use. It does 20 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon. And since this deck does not include many one-hit knockout attacks, you can reduce the amount of damage a Pokemon needs to do to knock out a Pokemon if you use Flying Flip a couple of turns. And then of course this card does have a free retreat cost, so you can Guzma it into the active Pokemon spot, retreat it for free, put that same Golisopod GX, for example, back into the active Pokemon spot, and use First Impression again. And then the final Pokemon I have in this deck would be Tapu Lele GX. I use 3 copies of this card from the Guardians Rising set. This card is solely for its ability, Wonder Tag, and when you play this card from your hand to your bench, you may search your deck for a supporter. Of course, the first turn during the game, you want to go and find Bridget to get your bench Pokemon set up. I like to get 2 Zorua and 1 Wimpod. And also, it's useful to have 2 Wimpods. So if you have a Zorua in the active Pokemon spot, go and get 1 Zorua and 2 Wimpod. But you can also use Energy Drive on this card. For 1 double colorless energy, it does 20 damage times the number of energy attached to both active Pokemon. So there's a look at the Pokemon in this deck. Again, Golisopod GX is going to be your primary attacker. Mewtwo is in this deck to help with fighting type Pokemon. And then Zoroark from the Breakthrough set is potentially a powerful attacker from the bench, quickly going into the active Pokemon spot against something that has a lot of energy set up on it. So next up here would be the trainer cards, 33 total trainers in this deck. I'll take a look at the supporter cards first. 16 supporters. Started off here with Guzma from the Burning Shadow set, 4 copies of this card. I do not use any Floatstone trainers, so this essentially replaces that card. Guzma says the following: switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with their active Pokemon. If you do, switch your active Pokemon with one of your bench Pokemon. So you can have something set up on your bench and move it into the active Pokemon spot to attack. You can also modify your opponent's active Pokemon to either put something in that spot that isn't set up or something that you can knock out in 1 turn. Next up here would be Acerola. I used 3 copies of this card. This is also from the Burning Shadow set because Golisopod GX and Zoroark GX both have high HPs of 210. A lot of Pokemon won't be able to knock out those 2 Pokemon in 1 turn. So Acerola will help prolong the time you can have those Pokemon in the active Pokemon spot and how long it'll take your opponent to get prize cards. And if you have something like Golisopod GX in the active Pokemon spot and Wimpod on your bench, you can use Acerola and then evolve Wimpod into Golisopod GX, the one that you just returned to your hand. So Acerola says put one of your Pokemon that has any damage counters on it and all cards attached to it into your hand. Next up here would be Supporter N. This is from the Fates Collide set. Each player shuffles his or her hand into his or her deck, then each player draws a card for each of his or her remaining prize cards. So this can help you later in games if you are losing and your opponent only has 1 or 2 prize cards left. It will restrict the amount of cards that your opponent gets into your hand. And then early in games, this card is very similar to Cynthia. You're going to get 6 cards into your hand. So I used 3 copies of this card. I used 2 copies of Bridget, and I try and use Bridget the first turn of the game, and then later on I can discard it with Trade, the ability on Zoroark GX. This is from the Breakthrough set, and it says, search your deck for 1 basic Pokemon EX, or 3 basic Pokemon, and put them onto your bench. And like I mentioned, I'm looking for either Zorua or Wimpod for the most part, and putting those onto my bench. That way, during my second turn, I can evolve those Pokemon. I used 2 copies of Cynthia. This is one of the best supporters in the 2018 Standard Format. It is from the Ultra Prism set. It says, shuffle your hand in your deck, then draw 6 cards. So this does not affect your opponent's hand at all. And then no matter when you use this card in the game, you always draw 6 cards. And having 6 cards in your hand isn't that important with this deck, just because Zoroark GX can get the exact cards you want into your hand each and every turn. The final supporter that I use is Mallow. This is from the Guardians Rising set. 2 copies of this card. It says, search your deck for up to 2 cards, shuffle your deck, then put those cards on top of it in any order. So this is used in combination with the trade ability on Zoroark GX. I use this first, then use trade to get the 2 cards that I want into my hand. So if you're using Zoroark GX in a deck, definitely use Mallow with it. Next up would be the item, tool, and stadium cards. Start off here with Field Blower. This is from the Guardians Rising set. It says choose up to 2 in any combination of Pokemon tool cards and stadium cards in play and discard them. Like I mentioned, if you're facing a Garbodor deck, you want to remove the tool cards attached to Garbodor, so you can use both Tapu Lele GX and Zoroark GX's abilities. And then if there's a stadium card in play, for example, you can discard that card. Next up here would be Puzzle of Time. I use 4 copies of Puzzle of Time. This has 2 options. You can either play 1 Puzzle of Time at once, then you can look at the top 3 cards of your deck and put them back in any order. That can be used with Zoroark GX's trade ability, or if you play 2 of these cards at once, you can put 2 cards from your discard pile into your hand. So with only 8 energy in this deck, that is a useful option. Next up would be Ultra Ball. 4 copies of Ultra Ball. Lots of newer sets include this card. It says to discard 2 cards from your hand. If you do, search your deck for a Pokemon, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Then shuffle your deck. So the first turn of the game, you can go and get Bridget. And then the second turn, hopefully you have an Ultra Ball in your hand, and then you can evolve Zorua into Zoroark GX, or maybe Wimpod into Golisopod. And then with Puzzle of Time, you can go and get the cards you just discarded with that card or with Super Rod. Choice Band is next. I use 2 copies of Choice Band in this deck. This is from Guardians Rising. When you attach this to a Pokemon, it does 30 more damage when attacking a GX or an EX card. I only use 2 copies mainly because this is a 2 attack knockout deck. So even with 30 more damage, it's not going to knock out that many Pokemon. And then I use 2 copies of Enhanced Hammer. This is also from the Guardians Rising set. It says discard a special energy from one of your opponent's Pokemon. Lots of Pokemon out there utilize the double colorless energy. Some Pokemon may use a rainbow energy or a strong energy, so this card is very useful in today's TCG. And then the final trainer that I have, so 2 copies of Enhanced Hammer, and then 1 copy of Super Rod. This is from the Breakthrough set. It is similar to Puzzle of Time. It says, shuffle 3 in any combination of Pokemon and basic energy cards from your discard pile into your deck. So for example, if you have 2 grass energy in your prize cards, and you need more energy into your deck, you can use this to recycle those grass energy, or any other Pokemon. If you get Zorua knocked out early, you can go and get that with Super Rod. Last up here would be the energy cards. I use 8 total. 4 double colorless, and then 4 grass energy. Majority of the Pokemon require the double colorless energy. Only Golisopod GX requires grass energy. So there's a look at my Golisopod GX and Zoroark GX deck. I do like this deck quite well. Now the only problem I really have with this deck, and really any deck out there that includes Zoroark GX, is that you're going to have to go through a lot of your cards in your deck to get the cards you want to use each and every turn. I personally don't like that strategy, but it is very useful. All you have to do is to look at how many decks out there include Zoroark GX. But if you're looking for a fairly powerful deck that can knock out any Pokemon out there in 2 turns, this is a deck that you should definitely consider. Grass-type Pokemon, like Golisopod GX, are weak to Fire-type Pokemon, so you're going to be weak to Volcanion EX, Turtonator GX, Ho-Oh GX, those type of Pokemon. But again, if you are looking for a fun deck to play with, one that can do major damage for only 1 energy card, this is a deck for you. So there you have it. There is a look again at my Zoroark GX and Golisopod GX deck. I am hoping to keep reviewing 1 competitive deck a week on my channel I hope to get into Forbidden Light decks in the very near future. So there you have it. Thanks everyone for watching. As always, before you go, check out all the links in the description of this video, including links to my blog, Facebook, and Twitter pages, and stay tuned for more videos. Thank you.